we're going to talk about notes. You look at music and you see many different kinds of notes in different orientations, some filled in, some blank, and you may be wondering, what are the different types of notes? Why do they look different? Why are they placed where they're placed? What does each note mean? So today we're going to talk about what the different types of notes are, what they're called, how many beats or counts each note is worth, and why they're called what they're called. Let's start here. We're going to start on this chart here. We're going to start with a whole note. The whole note is an oval. It is worth 4 beats. Next on our list, we have a dotted half note. It's a kind of standard note shape that you see. It has a note head and it has a stem. It also has a dot to the right. And you'll notice the note head is not filled in. It is blank. A dotted half note is worth 3 counts. A half note is standard note shape, note head and stem, not filled in the note head. A half note is worth 2 counts. Then we have a dotted quarter note. Standard note shape, a head, and a note stem. It is filled in the head, and it has the dot to the right. That's worth 1.5 counts. A quarter note is standard note shape with this note head and a stem. Filled in, it's worth 1. 1 count, 1 beat. Now, what about these notes? These notes are actually worth less than 1 beat, less than 1 count. And we're going to talk a little bit about why. So an eighth note has a note head and a stem, but it also has a flag coming off of the stem. 1 flag. Now, if you have more than 1/8 note, you can connect them together with a beam. Eighth notes will be connected together with 1 beam if there's more than 1. And they are worth 1/2 of a beat. 16th note looks the same, except it has 2 flags coming off the stem, or if beamed together, it will have 2 beams connecting them together. That's how you can tell. And each 16th note is worth 1/4 of a beat. Then we come to a 32nd note, which you will not see very often. I've been playing music for more than 40 years, and I've only very rarely seen 32nd notes, mostly in orchestra music. A 32nd note looks the same as these, except it has 3 flags, or if beamed together, will have 3 beams connecting them. Each 32nd note is worth 1/16 of a beat. Now I want to add in here a dotted 8th note. You'll notice it looks the same as the 8th note, except that we have added a dot to the right side. You can add a dot to any note. We see here a dotted 8th note, a dotted quarter note, a dotted half note. You could have a dotted 16th note. You could even have a dotted 32nd note. You won't see those as often, though. So what the dot does, the dot adds half the value of the original note onto it. So for instance, here with a dotted half note, a half note is worth 2. So the dot adds half of that value, 1, onto the 2, so you end up with it being worth, a dotted half note being worth 3 beats. A dotted quarter note is usually worth 1. The dot adds half of that, half onto the 1, so a dotted quarter note is worth 1.5. Therefore, a dotted 8th note is worth 3/4 of a beat. Since the 8th note is worth half a beat, half of that is 1/4. Add half and 1/4, you get 3/4. So those are the standard notes that you will see how many beats they get. Now I wanted to show you here, it is just as likely that you will see the notes written upside down from this orientation, because it just depends on where the note is on the music staff. It can be written with the stem of the note going down. You'll notice that when the stem is going down, it's on the left side of the note head. When the stem is going up, it's written on the right side of the note head. So you are just as likely to see the notes being upside down as you are them being right side up in our orientation. Now, you may be wondering, why are these notes called what they're called? Why is this a whole note? Why is this a half note? Why is this a quarter note? And for instance, so let's take a look at this. I have written several of the notes on a music staff. You will notice in music is divided up into measures with lines that divide the line of music. These are up and down lines that divide the long line of music into sections, and these sections are called measures. Now, at the beginning of any piece of music, you will see a time signature. I have written here on my board. The most common time signature that we see is 4/4. Now, what that means is this top number tells you how many beats or counts there are in each measure. So here there's 4 beats in each measure. The bottom number tells you which type of note gets 1 beat, gets 1 count. When it's a 4, that means a quarter note gets 1 beat. If it was a 2, it would mean a half note gets 1 beat. If it was an 8, it would mean an eighth note gets 1 beat. But here it's 4/4. Now this is such a common time signature that sometimes you will see it written in music with a C, and that stands for common time. Now, when they decided to name the notes, they did it in reference to common time, 4/4. So for instance, here I have written a whole note in the first measure. A whole note is worth 4 beats. So 1 whole note takes up the whole measure. There's no room for anything else. That's why it's called a whole note. There's room for 2 half notes in a measure because each half note is worth 2 beats. 2 plus 2 is 4. There's no room for any more. So 1 of these half notes takes up half of this measure, which is why it's called a half note. Here we have 4 quarter notes in a measure. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. That takes up the measure, and 1 of these quarter notes takes up 1/4 of the measure, 1 out of 4. That's why it's called a quarter note. Here are eighth notes. 8 of them can fit in a measure. We have half plus 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 half. All of those halves added up make 4 beats. 1 of these eighth notes is worth one of these eighth notes takes up 1/8 of the measure, 1 out of 8. That's why it's called an eighth note. Here we go to the 16th notes. You can probably see why I didn't go on to write 32nd notes. It would be a lot of notes. So you'll notice for 16th notes, measure, because each of these notes is worth 1/4 of a beat. So we have 4 groups of 4 here. 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1. And so, well, 4 full beats. And 1 of these notes is 1/16 of the measure, 1 out of 16, which is why it's called a 16th note. So now you know what the different types of notes are and why they're called what they're called.